In today's episode, we talk about what it means to go from shame to freedom and what it takes to reclaim your life after being told to deny who you are. This conversation will be shared in two back to back episodes. Stay tuned for part one of this powerful story and let's keep moving forward together. Hey, this is Steph, and welcome to the Together Moving Forward podcast. Season 3. Hello, everyone. I'm Steph Bachal, and I am a human being. Welcome back to the Together Moving Forward podcast, a podcast helping to us LGBTQIA plus people embrace self-love and self-respect so you can celebrate yourself with pride. If you've ever struggled to fully love and respect yourself, you're not alone, and this podcast is here to help. As someone who has navigated my own journey of self-acceptance as a queer, I know the power of hearing voices that reflect our experiences. In this podcast, you'll hear real stories and conversations that will leave you with practical tools, fresh perspectives, and the confidence to embrace who you are with pride. I'm really happy to be here with you today for part one of this powerful episode with our guest, Lalo León, a Latino bisexual and 10-year conversion therapy survivor. To start, I need to say that I'm not a psychologist, a specialist, or someone with a college degree. I'm just a regular guy here to share with all of you and support each other. I won't tell anyone what to do or how to do things. Instead, I'll share my journey and we will all share our journeys together. We'll learn from each other how to move forward. Before we go any further, if you like this podcast, please subscribe now and share, because the more we unite, the stronger we become. It might seem like a small gesture, but it truly makes a huge difference. Today, I'm honored to welcome Lalo León, a debut author, architect, and retired mariachi whose incredible journey from 10 years of conversion therapy to reclaiming his life and identity is nothing short of inspiring. This conversation is about what it means to go from shame to freedom and what it takes to reclaim your own life after being told to deny who you are. Let's go see what Lalo has to share with us. Lalo, welcome to the Together Moving Forward podcast. I'm really happy you accepted the invitation.
Thank you for having me, Steph. It's a great pleasure.
You've spoken about growing up on the US-Mexico border in a strict religious environment. How did those early experiences shape your sense of identity and belonging?
Well, especially growing up on the border, it was very hard to not have the presence of Mexico literally right in your backyard. And there's a saying, especially from the border, I'm not from here or I'm not from there. And so you always have this sense of you're not fully identifying with America, but you're not fully identifying with Mexico. So you have this sense of you're living in an between two countries, two cultures, two languages. And that really did play heavily growing up because you identify as an American, but there's still moments where people still say, no, you look and act and talk Mexican. But then if you go to Mexico, they're like, no, you're American. You're not one of us. And so there's always that sense of you always have a sense of acceptance to a certain point, and then a sense of rejection on another point. That also really played heavily when I started to write my novel, because I did write it in two languages. And I wanted something to really play into the idea of not what it's like to be bisexual. Bisexuality is defined about who you are going to bed with, but really in that idea that you are between two worlds. You're between the straight world and the queer world, and how you move in and out of those spaces, and you learn to navigate how those two spaces interact with each other and how you interact with them. And then also the language part of it as well, because there's different codes and there's different words you use in one and then different words you use in the other. And the idea that the book is written that way also plays into that. From the religious standpoint, we grew up in an environment that makes Mormons look liberal. We were not allowed to have credit cards. My mom was not allowed to wear a skirt above the ankle. She wasn't allowed to wear makeup. We weren't allowed to listen to anything but church music. And that really did have a sense of this idea that you have to have this very strict fundamentalist idea of what it meant to live through life and walk through life. And so I learned to have a very light touch with the world, just because there was always this sense that you shouldn't be too much into the world, and you should really try to isolate and separate yourself from that world, which did have its effects later on in life. And it really did really shape my worldview. And it took a long time to really try to change that worldview into something that I found to be more accepting and actually more useful in my day-to-day life.
So right from the start, you were kind of told to be in a certain container and fit in the other people's expectation.
Absolutely. And even more so is the fact that you had to conform to an idea of who they were. And that idea was not Mexican. It wasn't ethnic. And there was a very concerted effort to try to erase everything that was about me being Mexican. So being Catholic was, being Catholic is like being Muslim and being Arab. Is you may not be a practicing Catholic as a Latino, but you are surrounded, and the culture kind of revolves around that. So you may not go to church, but you still have to celebrate Christmas the way the rest of the family does. You still have to go to mass on certain days that you have to. And that was kind of seen as a threat to this very small enclave, this very small community. It was almost demonized being Catholic. And having anything outside of what was seen as this very Americana type of mentality was deemed to be demonic and seen as something other than what was holy and godly. And then when you throw a sexuality on top of that, that's anything but heterosexual, yeah, you learn to keep your mouth shut, because there was a lot of blatant and open homophobia, biphobia, transphobia that really just percolated through this community. And I can't emphasize enough, this wasn't like a huge church. This wasn't like, a mega church. This was like a church of maybe 100 people in a very small town in New Mexico. But still, that became my whole world. That became everything. That was my social circle. Those are the people that I was allowed to talk to. The kids at that church were the people that I grew up with. This was essentially my entire worldview condensed into these 100 people, and really not seeing anything beyond that. And a part of that also was later on in life, I did try to explore my Mexican identity and really push it. Luckily, by that time, we had kind of moved on to a less fundamentalist church. At the time, I was also a musician. This shows just how close to Mexico we were. We didn't have Glee Club in high school. We had mariachi. So I joined mariachi and I loved it. I excelled at it. I think I was a really good violinist on that. But it also became a point of contention later on, especially with conversion therapy. That was just seen as mariachi was making me gay, is what it came down to, which kind of made no sense, because mariachi, you have this idea of being, the ideal Mexican man. You're the macho. You come riding on the horse. You got your full traje on. You're singing. You're wooing women, but that's making you gay. So those were the things that really did play a lot in my childhood and even into my adolescence, that really made ripples on through the rest of my life, for better or worse.
You make me think of, I kind of went through the same thing, but not as strict. I'm from a small French-speaking town. in Quebec, in the south of Quebec in Canada, and it was the same thing. Like the environment was about the church and the religion. And of course, I wanted to be a figure skater. Like you were a singer
Mhm.
in that group, and to me, to be a figure skater in that small French-speaking town made me gay right away. You
Yeah.
know, so my identity was right away into here's the fag of the village,
Mhm.
and with the religion and what I should be doing and who I should have been, I mean, was a little bit of what you're saying. So it makes me realize that, you can be from anywhere, but the impact of what people want you to be from such a young age is what makes us wanting to heal later and be ourselves. But we carry this. I still carry this. I'm sure you still carry it.
Of course.
But it's really interesting that, from your point of view and my point, how there's so many what's the word? Similar
Similarities.
similarities. There you go. Yeah. Really interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I think especially when you are the lone person in that type of situation, it becomes really hard to have the bravery to be
Yeah.
yourself
Yeah.
because I always say there's always the pressure of the culture. And if the culture is not with you, it does feel like you are standing completely alone and you have to push against the entire world pushing against you.
Yeah. Totally understand that. Conversion therapy played a major role in your journey. What was the turning point that helped you break free and begin reclaiming your true self?
So, conversion therapy, let me just start off with the basics. It really is a systemic form of trying to change someone. I mean, that's really the basics of it. You're trying to change someone into something that is more desirable to society. It just happens to be that that's more particular for sexuality and gender identity. The practice, there's different forms of the practice. Mine was more in a clinical psychological setting. I had a pastor who was there that kind of administered that he was also a counselor. A lot of that was playing through kind of this meditative prayer stuff, which I detail well in the book. But there, eventually, you start to also practice this mindset that you have to get confirmation from the world to see that what you're doing is actually working. So if I know something really stupid as, if you can comment on, an Eagles and Dolphins, game and people, other men just assume that you know about football and you can talk about sports, that's proof that your therapy is working and that you are actually turning straight.
Wow.
That's what it comes down to. So you look for a lot of external things to affirm that what's going on in your head is actually working, which it really is playing into a lot of your core beliefs and manipulating your core beliefs, particularly about yourself and how you look at the world. It can work to a certain point. When things happen or when life starts throwing you curveballs, it doesn't necessarily work the same way. And what you find is that the perfection that you're looking, the kind of standard perfection you're looking from other people, from other things, imperfect world really gets highlighted. So I went through a lot of tragedies at the time. So my my grandmother had cancer, my aunt had cancer, my other aunt had cancer, my mom had a stroke. I had lost my job twice. It was during the downturn of the market, and Phoenix got hit really hard during that time in 2008, 2010. What eventually led me to this is I had also gotten to the point where I was diving more and more into fundamentalist Christianity and getting more involved into the church and finding myself essentially in a what I would say is a small cult. a small cult-like group, a lot of groupthink, a lot of echo chamber kind of idealism, a lot of, exorcisms in the middle of the night, and I see demons in the carpet. And there was a point where people were sending me pictures of like, do you see the demon in the carpet? And I was like, I see a stain in the carpet. I think you need to clean your carpet. But but eventually that got me so burnt out, I had nothing left. At that point, when you turn the volume up to 11, everything starts to fail. In that failure, I was left with no church, no social group, a very small amount of friends, and my thoughts, and a lot of time on my hands. I think at this time I had been laid off, and this was going to be one of the longest times that I was laid off. I think I was laid off for like 8 months. And I would just sit at home and really just evaluate what had happened all this time. And really, once you start having that little question of, was all that conversion therapy true? You start to take one little step and then one little step, and you give yourself a little allowance. Over the course of 3 years from that point, I really came to the conclusion that I had been put into something that was very damaging. I had been put into something that was manipulative, and I had been put into something that wasn't true, wasn't real, and really wasn't getting, it never promised what it promised. It did a lot of other things, but it didn't promise what it promised. It was at that point I had essentially left the church at around 2014. And about 2016 is when I finally decided to come out of the closet. And, I told my mom, who, for better or worse, she had found out about me when I was younger, and she had put me into conversion therapy because she thought that that's what you do. We grew up in the church, and they told her that it would work. I think she regrets doing that to this day. Like, she saw me miserable, but she never had the wherewithal or the courage to say, it's okay. You can stop this. But I also thank her for not doing that, because I had to come to those terms myself and realize it for myself and not let anybody tell me that. And over the course of a really bad Italian dinner at a really nasty chain restaurant, I uncomfortably told my mom, hey, Mom, I'm bisexual. And she's like, oh, thank God, it's about time you said it. And to this day, like, she's been my biggest advocate for that. And she's been my strongest defender. Never piss off a Latina mom, because they're like tigers, they'll come after you. But she had always been in the back of her mind waiting for that day. And I think she was pretty relieved that day in September 2016 that it finally came out.
Isn't that incredible, the pressure that she felt to feel like she had to put you in this, and what the environment around us is pressuring us to do and be, and all our surrounding? That's like, I don't know. To me, it's that makes me upset, and because what I had to go through also, but and still have to go through today. What we still have to go through, but it's quite amazing how human beings, how we are made of that. We have to just follow the path that their surrounding and other people are telling us to do and be. It's just incredible.
Yeah. And it's funny because after the fact, only a few years ago did she actually tell me what the therapist, because we were going to the same therapist at the same time, what he had told her. And she gave me all the books that he gave her to read. And all it was trying to reinforce what I was going through in the conversion therapy, how to reinforce that, yes, it's working. Yes, it's doing its job. All the little notes that she had from the therapist, and those, I still hold on to that stuff, because I'm still in that point where sometimes I don't believe that it's happened. And sometimes you need a little bit of a reality check, and you have these little artifacts that you can come back to and see, oh no, this actually happened. This is real. This occurred. This happened to you. You know, ruminate on it for another day. You feel miserable and you put it back, and then you can go back on your merry way and try to figure the rest of life out. But those little things still can stir up quite a bit, you know, because it's been almost 9, 10 years. No, it's been longer. It's been about 13 years since I stopped the practice. And even then, there's still effects that still come up.
Of course. Okay, let me ask you this. Why do you think people want us to be that way, a certain way? What is it pushing the human beings to want all the surrounding to be exactly one way instead of being just who we are? What do you think it is?
I think in particular, especially when it comes to conversion therapy in the church, if it's a more frightening scenario for people to think that if God can forgive gay people for being gay, trans people for being trans, what does that say about them? What does that say about the work they've done to be quote unquote good enough for God? And I think it really does stem from this idea that we don't believe as people that we are good enough for what we deserve, whether it's a cookie or God's love. I think it really does come down to that. And when you get to that point where you work for what you need to achieve, when other people get it for free, you want to make them like, oh, you have to do exactly what I went through, because if you don't, you negate everything that I do. So I think there's a lot of pressure from within the church that really pushes people to think, you know, I have to, because a lot of it was being treated like you were an addict. I mean, most of the conversion therapy focused on my addiction to men and equating it to a heroin addiction. So they think, yeah, and I was like, I mean, kissing a guy does not make me fall asleep, you know, in the middle of the street. But at the same time, when you have those senses of, you know, you can work in an addiction to become sober, then it becomes about work and not benevolence. And I think for me, I never really, I can't say that I lost my faith, but it did change quite a bit throughout this experience. And one of the things that I really had to come to terms with was, what's a greater heresy? Me kissing another guy, or saying that God cannot love me because of that? Because then you say God isn't powerful enough to love even that. And I think that that's the biggest thing for people within religious communities to recognize, is that when you really look at the philosophies and the religion behind it, the theology, you get to a point where there's a lot of things that don't make a whole lot of sense from what you believe. And if I truly adhere to what Christianity is saying, I think there's a more concrete faith to trust that God will accept me than trying to work at conversion therapy in hopes that God will accept me.
We're not going to go down that road because it might be offending to people what my beliefs are. But from going to Catholic religion too, and all I'm going to say is that if there's a God, I know that God wants me to be happy, to have a fulfilled life, to be good with other people. I say thank you. I say please. I help anyone that I can help. I think for me, if there's a God, I'm sure he loves me the way when I'm being myself and when I'm being a genuine person to everybody else. So, but that's all I'm gonna say because I don't want to go down that road. But yeah,
Yeah, you can go down that road. It just gets mired in mud.
yeah, because that's my belief, and from everything I've been through, also, I would never go back into being somebody that I'm supposed to be instead of being just happy and being myself, and actually show other people how to be happy and how to be generous and genuine people to others. I think to me, that's my religion and that's my God. As a Latino, queer man, and survivor of conversion therapy, how have you navigated the intersection of culture, faith, and sexuality in your life?
Well, I know for me, and I think I said this before, was, I never lost my faith going through all this, but it did have to change quite a bit. One of the bigger things for me to recognize was the personalness of my faith and really understanding my faith as something that is uniquely mine, determining for myself what my beliefs are, what I have come to conclude, what I interpret and read from the world, and how that really forms and shapes my worldview is extremely personal. And, you know, even then, as I've moved on from conversion therapy and kind of left a fundamentalist Christian background, I have come back to Catholicism, not because I believe Catholicism is the end all be all, or Catholicism is the best, or Catholicism is the oldest Christian religion. It really is because of the cultural identification. Like I said before, being Mexican and being Catholic is the same thing as being Muslim and being Arab. It's hard to escape it. So for me to go back to Catholicism had less to do about faith, more about reconnecting with who I was as a Mexican and being able to have those moments for myself amplify my identity. I think after all that's been said and done, one of the things that I had was like, I get to celebrate Day of the Dead. I think that's now becoming like a big cultural thing, Kobo and all those other things. That's me. That's who I get to be. That's who I get to celebrate. Those types of things have been really monumental in forming who I've become post-conversion therapy. I still have the personal beliefs of what I have. So I am Catholic to a point, and I keep it where it needs to be. But learning to have that connection has really been something that was missing in a lot of it. And in effect, it was kind of an act of protest. As much as reclaiming my sexuality, reclaiming who my identity was, reclaiming my Mexicanness through all of this was just as big as that. And so when I look at all those things, the faith had to change so that I could reconnect with my ethnic identity. And that also reinforms who I am as a bisexual person, and coming together for a whole total package of an identity that for so long was suppressed, and really just getting to know myself, reintroducing myself to these things that were always on the surface, but never really brought to the surface.
Thank you so much, Lalo, for sharing this part of your life and inspiring all of us. And this is just the beginning. Part 2 of this powerful conversation will be out next week, so don't miss it. My dear friends, it is already time to say au revoir just for now. So please join me next Wednesday for part 2 of this episode with our guest, Lalo León. Everybody, share this podcast and spread the good news. By sharing this podcast today, you will help someone find the strength to embrace who they truly are. Wherever you are from in the world, we are all connected. Remember, solidarity beats hate. The more we unite, the stronger we become. Because at the end of the day, we are all equally human and we all deserve the same rights. One last thing before I go, put your hand on your heart and repeat after me, all of us together. I am deserving of respect and acceptance. Yes, I am deserving of respect and acceptance. From shame, guilt, silence, and rejection to pride, freedom, healing, and love. together moving forward. My dear friends, see you next week. Ciao. Subscribe now and share to uplift, empower, and make a real difference in our community.